Our story would begin on a farm in Germany. Father Conrad and Mother Louise would have 7 children, 4 boys, Conrad, Henry, Frederick, August, and 3 girls, Minnie, Lena, and Amelia, who oftentimes went by Molly. Fred was the second to the youngest of the family, and August was the last born. In 1881, father of 7 children, husband to Louise, head of the Duesenberg household, Conrad Duesenberg, would pass away. A couple years later, Henry would migrate to the United States, the shining light on the hill, to start a new life. 1 year later, to reunite the family, Louise would sell the family farm and move the whole family to America. Frederick was about 9 when this happened. Conrad would purchase 200 acres or 81-hectare farm in Floyd County, Iowa, not far from Rockford, Iowa, which was where the Duesenberg family would call home. Fred Duesenberg would become fascinated with mechanics at an early age. He would attend public school through the 8th grade and would further his education by completing at least 1 year in mechanical drafting. Most of his engineering skills came from working with his hands through apprenticeships. Fred's first job off of the family farm was working as a mechanic for a farm dealer at the age of 17. August, who would go by Augie by friends and family, also would go to school through 8th grade. His mechanical and manufacturing skills were mostly natural. Both of the brothers, Fred and Augie, would get into bicycles and bicycle racing. Making a name for themselves in bicycle racing, Fred would open up a bicycle shop that built, sold, and repaired bicycles. Fred would fall in love with the sport. The guy set 2 world record speed records in bicycle racing, which Fred used to promote his bicycle sales. By the end of the century, the name Duesenberg was synonymous with racing bicycles. It was an Iowa household name in the bicycle industry. Both of the Duesenberg brothers would get bitten by the internal combustion bug, and they would begin experimenting with the internal combustion engine. The first engine they would ever produce was a single cylinder, which would power a bicycle. In 1903, Fred Duesenberg would get out of the bicycle business. There is conflicting information on whether he sold his company and Augie bought another bicycle company or Augie took over Fred Duesenberg's company. But either way, Augie would stay in Iowa and open up his own bicycle shop on Main Street, Gardner, Iowa. Augie would also meet his future wife at that bicycle shop, Gertrude Pike, and would marry her in 1906. Fred Duesenberg would move to Kenosha, Wisconsin to work at the Thomas B. Jeffries Company on an automobile called the Rambler. Thomas B. Jeffries Company was founded in 1902 by the guy with his name on the sign, Thomas B. Jeffries, who was an inventor and industrialist, building his first car prototype in 1897. Thomas B. Jeffrey was also a bicycle manufacturer. The bicycle model that he would sell was the Rambler, and would sell his stake in Gormley and Jeffrey to American Bicycle Company to finance his car endeavor. Fred would learn a lot during his time with the Thomas B. Jeffries Company and would return to Iowa 1 year later, where he would work as a machinist at an Iowa auto supply company and would open his own garage to be a sales agent for Jeffries Company selling Ramblers. While all of that was going on, Fred was also working on his own car behind the scenes. It was a runabout-style car. The car was called the Marvel, and it was powered by a 24-horsepower twin-cylinder. The cylinders were opposed to one another, water-cooled, and it used a water pump instead of thermosiphoning. Overhead valve, and it had a displacement of 200 cubic inch displacement. The car was mid-engined with the engine mounted under the floor in the center. One day, a local lawyer named Edward Mason would come into Fred Duesenberg's repair shop and would see the Marvel car, and he was impressed by what he saw, so much so that he put up his own capital to produce the car. The car would debut in 1906, 2 years after the Marvel was built. The car would become the Mason Runabout, named after the guy that put up the capital to produce the car, Edward Mason. It was advertised as the fastest, strongest 2-cylinder car for sale in America, promoting the car's strength by driving up 47 stairs of the Iowa State Capitol building. The car also claimed to be very economical as well, 475 miles on 18 gallons of gas, getting an impressive 26 miles to the gallon. In the early years, the car was produced in Des Moines, Iowa from 1906 through 1909. They would offer two different body designs, the runabout and touring car. Mason would get into automotive racing in 1907. In 1909, Frederick Maytag of Maytag Washing Machines wanted to get into the automotive business, so he and his son, Elmer, would buy Mason, reorganize the company as Maytag Mason Motor Company, and would move production to Waterloo, Iowa, and would offer two models. The two-cylinder model, which would keep the name Mason, and they would offer an all-new four-cylinder model called the Maytag. The two models would be labeled like that until 1911, when both models would be renamed to Maytag. But also in 1911, Maytag decided to get out of the cutthroat automotive business entirely to focus on his washing machine business, which would become a washing machine empire. The Duesenberg brothers would leave Mason. Well, I guess technically Mason left them when they relocated to Waterloo, Iowa, when the Maytags took over, but was able to retain the Mason name for their race cars they were building. 505 miles away in Auburn, Indiana, another automotive manufacturer started to take hold. Growing out of the Eckhart Carriage Company, going back to 1874, founded by Charles Eckhart, the carriage company had humble beginnings, building his first buggy in his father-in-law's parlor. In 1875, Charles would build his own shop to produce buggies and carriages in. Before the buggy business, Charles was born on February 24th, 1841 in Germantown, Pennsylvania. Charles would leave home with $15 to his name. Charles would spend years working 16-hour days in dye houses in Philadelphia, working various odd jobs until eventually getting in with a carriage company in Hillsdale, Pennsylvania, where Charles would learn the ins and outs of the carriage business. Charles would save as much as he could during this time. Charles would serve in the American Civil War, fighting on the Union side. After the war, Charles, with his wife and 4 kids, would relocate to Auburn, Indiana in 1874, getting into the carriage business himself. Sons Frank and Morris would take management jobs at the Eckhart Carriage Company in 1895, giving Charles the chance to pursue other endeavors. Getting into politics in 1900, running for governor of Indiana, mayor in 1904, and Congress in 1908. Charles Eckhart didn't win any of those elections, and after his stint in politics, Charles would get into philanthropy, donating loads of capital to several building projects around Auburn, Indiana, funding the Eckhart Library, YMCA, and Eckhart Park, among other projects. Well, Charles was out there making Auburn great again. Back at the buggy factory, Frank and Morris would get bitten by the automotive bug around 1900. Their first car would be shown at the Chicago Auto Show, powered by a 10-horsepower single-cylinder, chain-drive, 2-speed planetary transmission. The body style was a runabout car priced at $800, which would be equivalent to you spending $28,879.18 in the year 2025. It didn't sell well, being priced above what other companies had to offer. Also in 1903, the company was reorganized and incorporated as the Auburn Automobile Company. A twin-cylinder was added to the model lineup in 1905. Four-cylinder came in 1911, producing 25 horsepower. Auburn was a modestly successful company, much like this channel. It never got the big boom that the other automotive companies got. The company started circling the drain, with receivership looking like it might be a possibility. Before the company went into receivership in 1919, the brothers would decide to get out of the automotive business, selling Auburn to a group of Chicago investors headed by Ralph Austin Board. Auburn was set to make an all-new model, which was pretty much ready to go when the brothers decided to get out of the automotive business. It was powered by Continental's Inline 6. The new model was called the Beauty 6. The Beauty 6, though new and stylish, with many improvements over all of the previous Auburns that came before it, it did not attract the buyers that they were hoping for. It also didn't help that there was a major recession in 1921, and it lasted until 1922, and it had a negative impact on all industry, especially the automotive industry. By 1924, Auburn was only producing 6 cars a day, and they wasn't selling. Not wanting the company to go into receivership, the group of investors would begin to look for someone on the outside of their operation to come in and manage the company. Back to the Duesenberg brothers, who are still in Iowa building Maytag Mason race cars. It's important to note that when the Maytags got out of the automotive business, Edward Mason would resume control of Mason Motor Company. Fred Duesenberg would use part of the factory to build his new 4-cylinder race cars. Fred and Augie Duesenberg would pick up and move to St. Paul, Minnesota around 1913, where they would establish Duesenberg Motors Company. The Duesenberg brothers would begin work on their first race car. Aside from the Marvel, this would be their first car that they built from the ground up. It would be powered by Duesenberg's all-new engine, which was the walking beam, and it would be a breakthrough engine for the Duesenberg brothers, putting them on the map, so to speak. The engine was a tall, inline 4-cylinder overhead valve, but the valves went in horizontal and they were actuated by huge rocker arms. The engine was built in both 8-valve and 16 valves, either 2 valves or 4 valves per cylinder. And uniquely enough, the exhaust exits from the top. If you want to learn more about this engine, it was covered in an engine episode, which I will link here as well as in the description below. But it was a work of art and powerful for the era, producing anywhere from 75 to 164 horsepower. It was built for any application you'd like: marine, automobile, and aircraft. In 1913, the Duesenberg brothers would attract the attention of Commodore James A. Pugh, who wanted to build a high-power racing boat to enter to win the Harmsworth Trophy. He wanted the trophy back in the USA. The Harmsworth Trophy was the first annual international award for motorboat racing. It was not a contest between individuals per se, but between nations. The original rules were to have boats designed and built by residents of that country and only using materials solely from that country. Founded in 1903 by newspaper publisher Alfred Charles William Harmsworth. Pugh was building a 40-foot hydroplane called the Disturber 4, and it needed a powerful engine to move it. Pugh enlisted the help of the Duesenberg brothers, which they came up with a unique engine designed to power this beast, and it was a straight 12. But not just one straight 12, this boat would get 2 straight 12-cylinder engines. Each engine was 10 feet long, single-piece crankshaft, which was supported by 7 main bearings, 1-piece aluminum crankcase. The block was cast in 6 blocks of 2. Each pair of cylinders was water-cooled with the intake in the middle of the blocks. The exhaust valves were on the outside. Each cylinder had 2 spark plugs per cylinder. This engine featured fully pressurized oil and lubrication system, which was a new feature for that time period. The inline 12 used Duesenberg's walking beam design with a bore of 6.75 inches and a stroke of 7.5 inches. Displacement was 3,221 cubic inch displacement, or 52.8 liters. The engine would make an impressive 750 horsepower at 1,500 RPM or 800 horsepower at 1,600 RPM. Each engine weighed about 2,700 pounds each. At full tilt, this engine was consuming 132 gallons of fuel per hour. These engines were built in the St. Paul, Minnesota factory, built in 1913, installed in the boat around mid-1914. On July 2nd of 1914, Disturber 4 was launched on the Chicago River, where they would put the vessel in its paces, achieving speed records of over 50 miles per hour. Feeling satisfied about that, the boat was shipped to New York City, loaded onto the SS Minnetonic, and was shipped across the pond to compete for the Harmsworth Trophy. The festival was August 15th through the 18th. Augie Duesenberg would accompany the boat to make sure all the engines were running perfectly. While the Disturber 4 was en route crossing the Atlantic Ocean, Arch Duke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was assassinated, which was the final straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, which catapulted the world into World War I. The Harmsworth Trophy would be canceled that year. Augie would convince James Pugh to let him take the engines out and make various improvements and changes. Disturber 4 would run a race off the coast of Chicago on October 20th of 1914. The first lap, they set a record speed of 56.6 miles per hour. The Disturber 4 was so fast that it finished the race 17 minutes ahead of the closest boat that was behind them. Flying ace Eddie Rickenbacker would drive the first Duesenberg race car in the Indianapolis 500 in 1914, placing 10th. During World War I, the Duesenberg brothers would shift their focus to building engines under government contract for war machines, and they would collaborate with many other companies to produce legends, like the Bugatti Duesenberg U16, which was essentially two vertical inline eights paired together sharing a common crankshaft. Duesenberg also collaborated with King to build a U16. Duesenberg would build all kinds of engines during the war, from 4-cylinder to 6-cylinder to 8, V12s, and 16 cylinders, and all of them were things of beauty. The Duesenberg brothers, becoming somewhat bored of their walking beam engine, wanted to build an engine that featured an overhead camshaft. So they would start working on an all-new inline 8 with overhead cam. They would sell the rights to the 4-cylinder walking beam engine to Rochester Motor Company of Rochester, New York. Rochester Motor Company would sell that engine to anybody that wanted to buy it. It would find its way in Revere, Romer race cars, among other cars. After the war, the brothers would meet an icon in the racing world, Harold Miller, who went by Harry Miller. Harry Miller was a race car builder, engine designer and builder, innovator and inventor, and all-around automotive legend. Not to downplay the Duesenberg brothers, because at this point, they were legends as well. Harry would win the Indianapolis 500 9 times with cars that he built, and he would win 3 more times with engines that he built in other people's cars. Miller's cars accounted for 83% of the field from 1923 through 1928. Harry Miller was born December 9th, 1875 in Wisconsin. Harry had a short stint working for Yale Automobile Company of Toledo, Ohio, which was only in business for a very small window in time, 1901 through 1905. Harry would move to Lansing, Michigan, and take a job with Ransom E. Olds at Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile would get its start in 1897. Harry joined Oldsmobile to work on the Oldsmobile Vanderbilt Cup car. But after a bad race year, Harry would leave and would go to Los Angeles, California, where he would open up his own machine shop specializing in carburetor production. The carburetor business would evolve into tinkering with engines, which led to building his own engine designs, as well as fix other race car engines. In the 1910s, Harry's carburetor business was a carburetor empire, making over $1 million a year. Harry Miller would build and design his own race cars. In the mid-1920s, Harry wanted to kind of sort of go out into uncharted territory with front-wheel drive, and would have 2 working cars by the end of 1924, powered by a 122 cubic inch displacement engine. And it's important to note that Harry Miller didn't invent front-wheel drive. He just brought front-wheel drive into the 1920s. Fun fact, the very first front-wheel drive car was produced in 1769 by Nicholas Joseph Cugnot. The front-wheel drive concept intrigued Harry Miller because it eliminated the drive shaft, which usually was exposed in these types of race cars. Also, without the drive shaft, the driver could sit 9 inches lower in the car, improving center of gravity. Duesenberg would dominate at the races. Tommy Milton would win the Elgin Trophy in 1919. With all of the racing success, the brothers would sell their St. Paul, Minnesota factories and would move closer to the action, relocating to Indianapolis, Indiana in 1920. Their new company was Duesenberg Automobile and Motors Company. Fred and August Duesenberg would retain being engineers at this new company while simultaneously signing over naming rights. The Duesenberg name had a ton of weight to it. Naming rights and patents for Duesenberg engines to the promoters, Newton E. Van Zandt and Luther M. Rankin. And with this new company, the Duesenberg brothers would display their first production car, the Straight 8, at the Commodore Hotel in New York City. The Straight 8 was more than just another automotive racing engine built by the Duesenberg brothers. They wanted to get into building cars. The Straight 8 was not only an absolutely gorgeous engine, but it was also the name of Duesenberg's first car for sale to the public. The jury is still out on whether this model was actually called the Model A by Duesenberg or if it was just called Straight 8. It's a debate inside the Duesenberg community. Either way, the Duesenberg Straight 8 was the first inline 8 sold in America. The Duesenberg Straight 8 is genesis of the Straight 8 here in the States. And if you want to know more about that engine, we covered it in this engine episode. The Duesenberg Straight 8 was the first production car to use hydraulic brakes on all four wheels. And the goal was to produce or sell 100 cars a month. But by the end of 1922, fewer than 150 have been produced. Duesenberg would supply the chassis, running gear, engine, transmission, brakes, cowl. Body work would be done at any coach builder of your choice. Companies like, but not limited to, Dietrich, Judkins, Briggs, Walker. The Straight 8 would ultimately get delayed because the brothers wanted to make improvements, going from horizontal valves to overhead valves with an overhead cam. To simplify things, around 1920, Duesenberg would sell their New Jersey factory to Willis Overland, based in Toledo, Ohio, and they would move everything to Indianapolis, Indiana. Their offices in Newark, New Jersey, were also sold and relocated to Indianapolis, Indiana, bringing the Duesenberg empire to Indianapolis, Indiana, where it will stay till the end. The first Duesenberg Straight 8, aka Model A, is still in existence, and it resides at the Auburn and Cord Duesenberg Museum out there in Auburn, Indiana. And I gotta tell you, if you've never been there, that place is absolutely incredible. I got to make the pilgrimage last year, and I'm definitely going back there for Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg days. All of the cars start out in Eckhart Park, the same park that Charles Eckhart put up capital for. It's freaking cool. It's like you could just walk back in time and just see all these different places. And they take all of the cars and they park them around the courthouse down at the town square. It's just such a cool show, and you just get to meet some really cool people. The museum is absolutely epic. It's an absolute blast of a show. If you can go, I would definitely go, and I'll see you out there. It's in August. I'll put all the information in the description. Yeah, but anyway, the point was the very first Duesenberg Model A, aka Straight 8, is at that museum, and you could see it up close and in person. The first Duesenberg car, it was commissioned by Hawaiian businessman Samuel Northrop Castle. The company would continue to build race cars along with chassis for the public. Duesenberg would win Indianapolis 500, 1922, 24, 25, and 27. Van Zandt would leave the company in 1921. Duesenberg would produce the Straight 8 from 1921 through 1926, producing around 650 units. Fred and August Duesenberg were probably two of the best engineers of their day, but they were not businessmen. The company would struggle severely after Van Zandt left, and after struggling for years, Duesenberg was put into receivership in 1924. 158 miles up the road in Auburn, Indiana, the Chicago investors are talking about bringing someone in on the outside of their operation to run it, and they have just the guy in mind, E.L. Cord, who made his money in sales. The guy could sell ice to an Eskimo, sawdust to a carpenter, grass to a hippie, Well, the last one probably doesn't work, but you get my point. The guy could sell. E.L. Cord was born Warrensburg, Missouri, 1894. He was the second born of two children. When his father's business failed, he had to relocate his family to Illinois and then Los Angeles, California. E.L. Cord had a modest childhood. His father would pass away in 1911, tragically. His mother and sister would run an apartment building just to make ends meet. E.L. Cord would quit school going into his senior year to go and sell cars. E.L. Cord would buy Model Ts and turn them into race cars by removing the fenders and the bodies. And he would enter these cars in races, oftentimes winning, and then he would sell the cars on Monday after the race. Interesting to think of it, E.L. Cord might be the guy for the name of the phrase, race on Sunday, sell on Monday. E.L. Cord would take business courses at the YMCA, and then he would realize real quick, he found out real quick, that his mind was wired for business. E.L. would meet the love of his life, very beautiful girl with a warm personality, Helen Freshie. She was the daughter of a tenant of his mother's apartment business. E.L. Cord would elope Helen Freshie, on September 20th of 1914 in one of E.L.'s Model T Speedsters, which had a for sale sign on it. By the time E.L. was 25, he sold cars in Los Angeles, Phoenix, Chicago. But 1924, that was a big year for E.L. Cord, because that was the year E.L. Cord would go up to Auburn, Indiana, to meet with a group of Chicago investors to manage Auburn Automobile Company. E.L. Cord, looking around at all of the unsold inventory, E.L. Cord was already thinking who he could sell these cars to. He had names and numbers in mind, how he was going to get rid of all of these cars, all of this unsold inventory. E.L. knew that he could sell that inventory fast. He was also looking at other aspects, knowing the investors are practically up shit creek without a paddle. E.L. Cord would counter their offer to take over the company completely in a leverage buyout. The Chicago investors, they would accept E.L. Cord's counter. E.L. Cord would get busy repainting the cars in flashy colors. I'm talking bright yellows, oranges, lavenders, to make their cars pop and stand out. E.L. Cord would also add nickel trim to make his cars have a sparkle to them. E.L. Cord was able to turn the Auburn Company around and do something the other two owners couldn't do: make a profit. In 1926, E.L. Cord would take the drive down to Indianapolis, Indiana, to Duesenberg to meet Fred and Augie Duesenberg, wanting to buy the company for the name Duesenberg, which was one of the biggest names in engine manufacturing during this era. E.L. would acquire Duesenberg in 1926 and put it under the Auburn Company. Duesenberg would stay under Auburn until 1928, when E.L. Cord would establish the Cord Corporation Holding Company. E.L. Cord would amass a transportation empire of which no one has ever saw at this point in time. 3 automobile companies: Auburn, Cord, Duesenberg. By 1932, the Cord Corporation had over 60 companies, totaling over $125 million in assets. Companies included, but not limited to, Lycoming Engine, Stinson Aircraft, Checker Cab, Aviation Corporation, which would eventually turn into American Airlines, New York Shipbuilding, LeGrand Coach Builder, Lexington Motor Company, Limousine Body, McFarland, Union City Body, Central Manufacturing, A.H. Walker, Columbiana Axle Company, Parlay Transportation, among many others. In Cord's range of brands, Auburn was the entry level, followed by Cord in the center. Duesenberg was going to be on a completely different spectrum. The first model of Duesenberg to be built under E.L. Cord would be the Model X, and this one doesn't have falcon wing doors. It was offered for a very small window in time, 1926 through 1927. The Model X used a longer chassis than the Model A. It was powered by the same, or virtually the same, 260 cubic inch displacement single overhead cam engine, producing about 100 horsepower. Only about 13 were said to have been produced. 4 are known to survive after the Model X, E.L. Cord would partner with the Duesenberg brothers to make the ultimate car, no money, no expense. The two brothers were responsible for the mechanics of the car, and all of them would be custom coach built. So no two Duesenbergs are identical to one another. The engine that Fred and Augie would come up with to power these beasts is nothing short of incredible. Dual overhead cam, 420 cubic inch displacement. It was available in two flavors, technically three, but we'll get to that special model in a little bit. 265 horsepower, naturally aspirated in the Model J. A supercharged model was available called the Model SJ, and it produced an impressive 320 horsepower, a horsepower figure that would not be broken until the Chrysler 300 came out in 1955. Both Alan Leamy and Gordon Burrig would get credit for designing the Model J, which was the name of the Duesenberg model that they would produce next. Alan Leamy was born Arlington, Maryland on June 4th, 1902. Alan's father would take a new management job and relocate the family to Columbus, Ohio. During the move, Alan would get spinal polio, and he would have to use a cane and wear a leg brace on his left leg for the rest of his life. But despite having a major medical condition, Alan was a go-getter, not letting something like polio stop him from living his best life. In 1927, Alan's father would set up a meeting for his son, Alan Jr., at Marmon, a car company in Indianapolis, Indiana, established in 1902, founded by Howard Carpenter. The company would build high-end cars from 1902 through 1933, the most famous model being the Marmon V16. Fun fact, there were three companies, well, technically two companies, that produced the V16 in America. The Cadillac and Marmon. Peerless did build a prototype before going bust. Anyway, Al would get the job with Marmon as a entry-level stylist, draftsman. What was to be a fun, exciting job turned out to be a pretty boring one, and to add to it, his superiors were not interested in Al's forward ideas. Knowing there had to be a better job opportunity out there, Al started looking around. The talk of the town was E.L. Cord's new car that was under development. It was rumored to be front-wheel drive using Harry Miller's designs. Al was intrigued after finding out about the Cord Corporation. He wrote to E.L. Cord expressing his interest in the Cord project, and after taking a look at Al's portfolio, E.L. Cord was impressed at his forward-thinking ideas and offered him a job at Auburn as an Auburn designer, and the first car that he would design was the 1929 Auburn sedan. Al brought way more to the table than just great automotive designs. Al would teach a group of Auburn draftsmen and pattern makers how to make a full-size wooden styling buck, which would be completely covered in clay, and then they would sculpt the car and make a one-to-one representation of the car. So I wonder where Al learned it from, because possibly Marmon. If anyone knows in the comment section, because it's super interesting, if you Google what was the name of the first automotive designer to introduce clay model cars, their answer is Harley Earl. Huh. I learned something today. So, back to the clay car. Once the exterior of the car was finalized, they would paint them, add wheels and windows accessories, which would give the boss the best representation possible of what the finished product would actually look like. Al's next assignment was to design the Cord L29 grille, radiator shell, hood, louvers, fenders. The first two grills were rejected by Cord. The third one would be approved. Al Leamy was responsible for designing the first wave of Auburn, 1929 through 1934, Cord L29, 1929 through 1931, as well as some of the Duesenberg parts. The L29 Cord is a legendary car, recognized as being America's first front-wheel drive mass-produced car. It might actually be the first mass-produced car of the world, but mass production means different things to different people. Some people will argue and say that the Citroën Traction Avant was the first front-wheel drive mass-produced car because they produced more cars than Cord did. The L29 Cord being front wheel drive meant a couple different things. The transmission is mounted in the front of the engine. The engine is actually mounted backwards. So the front of the engine is located right next to the firewall, and the rear of the traditional engine would be at the front so the transmission could connect to it. That is why they had such long hoods. Another benefit to front wheel drive is the engine could sit lower, improving the center of gravity. Tragedy would ultimately strike in 1930. E.L. Cord's love of his life, Helen, would die of cancer on Saturday, September 13th, 1930. E.L. Cord was devastated, but would remarry 1 year later to Virginia Thorpe. After Helen's death, E.L. Cord began to lose interest in running an automobile empire, so he would bring in people like Harold Ames to run operations. Harold Ames started off as a car salesman. He worked his way up through the ranks, joining E.L. Cord in 1926, was involved with the development of the Duesenberg Model J. The company would suffer another catastrophic blow on July 2nd of 1932. Fred Duesenberg was driving home from New York to Indianapolis, Indiana, in a passenger car with a prototype engine, the same engine as used in the SSJ, but it was in a passenger car. Fred lost control of the car on a wet hill on Lincoln Highway, Ligonier Mountain, just outside of Jennerstown, Pennsylvania. The car flipped over, ejecting Fred from the car. Though Fred was in bad shape, good old Fred was expected to make a full recovery. Fred would dislocate his shoulder and had a spinal injury. While he was in the hospital, developed pleural pneumonia. Oxygen was administered, which helped initially, and the ammonia was gone, but it would relapse a couple days later. Fred Duesenberg, husband, father, creator of gorgeous and powerful engines, Augie's oldest brother, would die July 26, 1932, at the age of 55. Duesenberg would build two cars with a high-performance engine, which were called the SSJ, but it wasn't a passenger car. It was built on a shorter 125-inch wheelbase chassis. Two were built for Hollywood elites, Clark Gable and Gary Cooper. The SSJ, while the stock Duesenberg without the blower would produce 265 horsepower, the supercharged the SJ makes 320 horsepower. The SSJ would produce an impressive 400 horsepower, a horsepower figure that would not be matched until 1957 with the Mercury Marauder. The SSJ had an alleged top speed of 140 miles per hour. A case in which history kind of repeats itself a couple decades later. In the mid-60s, Carroll Shelby would build two Super Snake Cobras with 800 horsepower, 200 miles per hour alleged top speed. Bill Cosby would own one, Shelby would own the other one. Tony Maxey would get his hands on one of the two and destroyed one by driving off a cliff where there were no survivors, including the car. Just like the Shelby Cobra, the SSJ was twin supercharged. Auburn would introduce a V12 for the 1932 model year. Fun fact, it was the cheapest V12 on sale in America when it was available for purchasing. Other engines offered was 6, 8, and 12 from 1932 through 1934. In 1934, Auburn would get a complete redesign featuring a shovel grille that Harold Ames absolutely hated. Ames would enlist Duesenberg designer Gordon Borrig to come over and facelift the car, but it had to be done on a $50,000 budget, and that would include tooling costs as well. The job needed to be done for Auburn's big reveal in September of 1934. Harold Ames blamed Al Leamy for bad sales. He also relieved him of his duties at the Cord Corporation. Al Leamy would get picked up fast, accepting a job at Fisher Body Company working under Harley Earl at General Motors on June 1st of 1935. Al Leamy became a member of the LaSalle Design Studio. But 8 days later, Al became super ill, becoming septic after getting a routine vaccine as part of General Motors' annual physical. And 4 days later, he was dead. Al Leamy left behind a wife. He was only 33 years old at the time of his passing. Gordon Borrig would design the 1935 Auburns. They would ditch the V12, offering supercharged inline 8 as top choice, offering 6, 8 and supercharged inline 8s as engine choices. Needing money to buy food to feed the family, Gordon would move to General Motors, where he would compete in a styling competition where Gordon proposed an absolutely stunning streamlined sedan featuring a blunt nose, concealed headlights, swooping fenders. The design ranked last with Harley Earl and the bigwigs over at General Motors designer department. Harold Ames would see that design and he would get Gordon to come back to the Cord Corporation. The new design would become the Cord 810 812. The car would retain the front-wheel drive from its predecessor, the L29. Engine format would also change, going from straight 8 to V8, which allowed the hood to be shorter. The V8 would be naturally aspirated or could be equipped with a supercharger. And the supercharged models give a tell. For anybody that's in the know, if you see external pipes on an Auburn, Cord, or Duesenberg, that means that it's packing the supercharger. But what's interesting to note is that the Cord is the only one of the three to have the pipes come out both sides because of the way the manifold system works on top of the V8 engine. In contrast, the Auburn and Duesenberg have the external pipes, the external exhaust pipes, but they only come out one side instead of both sides. Shifted with a pre-selector Bendix electric hand. Bonus, what was the first car that used the Bendix electric hand? It's often misconception that the Cord was the very first company to use it, but they wasn't. Google will tell you that it was, but it's not true. If you know what company used Bendix electric hand first in the comment section below. Cord would produce the 810, 812 for only 2 years, 1936 and 1937. The Cord empire grew fast, but between the Great Depression, which took the fortunes of many rich people, no one had money to eat, let alone keep the lights on. Cars, no matter what brand, they just wasn't selling because nobody had money. The Great Depression was more than just the stock market crash. Yes, that was a big part of it, but it was compounded by bank runs, where bad speculation caused people to draw all of their savings from the bank. Banks loan money. They make money off your money, so they don't have everyone's money at every given time because, let's face it, they loaned it out to somebody else to make money off the interest. With the uncertainty in the market and just overall panic caused people to go to the banks and withdraw their savings, which the banks could do for a little while, but they couldn't do that with everybody's money. And then when the bank was out of money, the bank would go under. The customer was out and the bank was out of money, and there wasn't any government protection insurance on money in the bank during this time period. And the crazy thing of all, it could all happen again. Just think about this real quick. How hard is it to go down to your local bank and get $15,000 out? Even if it's your own money, you need days. Anyway, that was a problem. That was problem number one, and problem number two if you count the banks as a separate problem. After Cord's wife, Helen, would pass away, Cord would become disinterested in running an automotive empire. Production on all Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg would halt in 1937. E.L. Cord would cash out and sell the Cord Corporation to a New York banking group for $2 million. The group was headed by Emanuel and Company and Rockefeller and Company. E.L. Cord would go on to invest in real estate in the Beverly Hills and Los Angeles region. E.L. Cord would buy an appliance company, Handy Hot Appliance Company of Chicago. He also invested in mining, distilleries, American Airlines, which was Aviation Corporation Company, a company in Cord's original portfolio. Cord didn't stop when the Cord empire fell. Cord would live a long life. Cancer would eventually get him, though, on January 2nd of 1974 at the ripe old age of 79. In 1940, August Duesenberg and his nephew, Wesley Duesenberg, formed Duesenberg Model Company, where they made miniature race cars. Fritz Duesenberg, son of Augie Duesenberg, would try to revive the Duesenberg Company in the 1960s, but it wasn't successful. It's worth mentioning that there are companies out there that make replicas of the Cord 810, 812, as well as the Auburn Speedster and various Duesenberg cars. If you've made it this far, I just wanted to tell you thank you. Thank you so much for watching this episode. What have you learned in the comment section below? All right, now it's time for Would You Rather. And if yours isn't listed here, feel free to add it. These aren't fair by any stretch of the imagination, but which one would you rather have? Also, this list is money, no object, but which one would you rather have? 1934 Duesenberg Grabber, or 1934 Duesenberg Walker Coupe, or 1935 Duesenberg SJ Speedster, or this 1926 Duesenberg Straight 8 Opera Coupe. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. On to the second scenario. 1934 Auburn V12, or 1929 Cord L29, or 1936 Auburn SC for Supercharged 8, or 1936 Cord 810. I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free, pause the video. All right, now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to get both the name of the band, song title, and the song lyric that comes next will have their comment pinned to the top of the comment section. It's not far down to paradise. At least it's not for me. Just to reiterate, you need all three: the name of the band and or artist, song title, and the lyric that comes next. You get all three, and you'll have your comment pinned to the top of the comment section. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. There is one more side note that I want to leave you with before signing off here. In 1938, Dallas Winslow would purchase the building and establish the Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg Company. In 1960, Winslow would sell the rights to Glen Prey of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, where Glen Prey would move Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg Enterprise down to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. 1974 was the year that the Auburn Automobile Company admin building was purchased by Auburn, Cord, and Duesenberg enthusiasts and turned into the ACD Museum. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for everything that you guys bring in the comments. And until next time, toodaloo!